Welcome to Restore 2022. Today we're reading Samuel chapters 27 and 28. Saul has been hounding David to kill him. However, at the end of the last chapter, Saul has a change of heart, and the chapter concludes, "So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place." For the time being then, David is safe. But Saul is so erratic and his mood swings are so random that David doesn't feel safe. So he flees for sanctuary to Achish, the king of Gath. And just in passing, isn't it ironic that he should feel safest in the birthplace of his old adversary Goliath? But it's not the first time he's tried to find refuge there with Achish. We read of the first occasion in chapter 21, when, fearing he'd made a mistake and that Achish would harm him, David tricked Achish by faking insanity to escape his attention. So, having been tricked once by David, why did Achish accept his presence this time? Well, circumstances had changed. The first time David went there, he was alone. This time, he has a following of 600 fighting men. And since the use of mercenary troops was quite common in the ancient world, David's men could augment Achish's own battle ranks. These mercenaries were often political fugitives like David, and their loyalty to their new employer was based on their hatred of the ruler who had exiled them. So Achish of Gath's misplaced trust of David is based on the known enmity between David and Saul, but is also reinforced by the amount of booty which David brings him from his raiding expeditions. In chapter 28, the Philistines are gathering their forces again to fight against Israel. Achish assumes David's men will fight alongside his own, and so when you read it, notice that David's response is deliberately ambiguous. And so the narrative switches to Saul, who is scared out of his mind by the hordes confronting him, so he tries consulting God using quite legitimate means. But God has already rejected him from being king, so he doesn't answer. And Saul turns to illegitimate means. Instead, he turns to a medium, even though the Mosaic law forbade it. He asks her to call up Samuel from the dead, and Samuel does appear. Weird as perhaps this seems to us in our very material and secular world, it's not the only occasion in Scripture when the dead emerge into the world of the living. Moses and Elijah, for instance, appeared with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised and seen in Jerusalem when Jesus died upon the cross. The spiritual world is far more complex than we tend to imagine. However, notice the medium's astonishment and fear in verse 12 when Samuel does appear. It's not the result of her divination. This is an act of God. And Samuel has nothing new to say to Saul. The Lord has already torn the kingdom out of Saul's hand, and today he will give it to David.